Unit 2, Chapter 5. Ladder Quest. Find the ladder in the stained glass window. The power of the church. The big question. What practice in the Middle Ages show the influence and power of the church? It is 6 a.m. The church bells are ringing to welcome the day and to summon you to church. The early morning sunlight illuminates the stained glass windows. Sometimes at the daybreak, you attend a church service before starting work. You pray often and your life is anchored to the church. Stained glass windows in La Sainte Chapelle in Paris, France, built in the 1200s. Under the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, Christianity was accepted as one of several religions in the Roman Empire. It may be impossible for us to understand just how important the Christian church was to most Europeans in the Middle Ages. Not only did the local lords have great influence over people's life, but the church did it too. The power of the church had grown gradually over a long period of time. Christianity is based on the teachings of a man named Jesus, who lived hundreds of years before the Middle Ages began. Jesus' followers were known as Christians. In the first 300 years after Jesus' life, Christianity grew slowly. In fact, in the early years of the ancient Roman civilization, Romans were not permitted to practice the Christian faith. Later, Christianity was tolerated as one religion among several. Eventually, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Christianity spread throughout the empire. As it spread, the power and influence of the church in Rome grew. The Pope was the leader of the Western Church. As time went on during the Middle Ages, conflicts developed between the Eastern followers of the Church, who spoke Greek, and the Western followers, who spoke Latin. Finally, in 1054 CE, the two sides split over differing beliefs. The Eastern Church was called Orthodox. Members of the Orthodox Church thought their beliefs were orthodox or correct. The Western Church, based in Rome, was called Catholic. Members of the Catholic Church thought their beliefs were Catholic or universal. The two Christian churches that emerged during the Middle Ages still exist today. In Western Europe, almost every village and town had a church. Most people attended church on Sunday. In addition, certain days were considered holy days to mark important events in the life of Jesus and his followers. People did not work on these days, but instead went to church. Some holidays were feast days, and other holidays were days of fasting. Christmas, an important Christian holiday, was a time of feasting or celebration. The 40 days before Easter, another Christian holiday, were a time of fasting called Lent. Architects and craftsmen in the Middle Ages built beautiful churches to express their love for God. New engineering skills enable stone masons to create a style of architecture that later became known as Gothic. They built tall towers, arches, rose windows, and spires. Sometimes it took hundreds of years to complete a great medieval cathedral. The Christian church split apart: Catholic, Orthodox. Chartres Cathedral. Medieval pilgrims. Saint-Quay Abbey in Provence, France, was founded in 1148 CE. Holy shrines dedicated to people who played an important role in the history of Christianity were scattered across Western Europe. These shrines were usually places where religious figures had been killed or buried, or where miracles were believed to have happened. Most Christians hope to go on at least one journey or pilgrimage to visit one of these shrines in their lifetime. For many, going on pilgrimage meant walking or riding long distances, and eating and sleeping in roadside taverns or religious houses. Many men and women made the journey to fulfill a vow to God, to seek a cure for a disease, or just to travel abroad. Monks were men who chose to live apart from society and to devote their lives to the church. They spent their lives in monasteries, working on the land, studying, and praying. Monks were often the most educated people in Europe, especially in the early part of the Middle Ages. A monastery was a building or collection of buildings that housed monks. Monasteries were usually contained within high walls that provided a certain amount of protection. A painting from 1400 shows nuns kneeling in prayer. Interior of the Duomo or Cathedral of Pisa, Italy, began in 1000s. Women also joined the church. Women who devoted their lives to the church were called nuns. Nuns lived in convents or nunneries. Nuns received many of the same benefits as monks. They were educated and were taught crafts and other skills. As the church grew in power and influence, it became very wealthy. The church raised taxes and it owned land. People who held powerful positions within the church often came from a wealthy noble families. They gave large amounts of money to the church. The church also influenced political decisions and supported or opposed kings. Not only powerful people gave money to the church, all Christians were required to pay 1/10 of their earnings to the church. This payment was known as a tithe. However, there was a troubling side to this deeply religious period in history. Some people expressed ideas with which the Pope and other church leaders disagreed. Church leaders called contradictory opinions heresy, and the people who held them were called heretics. Heretics were treated cruelly. Precious books. Illuminated manuscripts were works of art. Page from Book of Hours created in the early 1400s for John, Duke of Berry, France. During the Middle Ages, monks and nuns studied the writings of ancient Greeks and Romans. Their libraries contained books about religion, science, poetry, mathematics, and history. Monks and nuns also copied ancient writings by hand. There were no machines or printers that made books. By copying these texts, monks and nuns helped to preserve or save ancient knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. In the late Middle Ages, the higher social classes who could read and even write owned their own prayer books, such as the Book of Hours. These prayer books were read at different times of the day. In addition to prayers, the books included biblical texts, calendars, hymns, and painted pictures. Many of the books produced by monks and nuns contain exquisite art and design features. After the Middle Ages, as a result of Johannes Gutenberg's inventions of the printing press around 1450 CE, more affordable books were produced. These printed books began to replace the beautiful handmade books and made this original manuscript even more rare. If you were a monk, novice working in monastery garden, novice taking his vows. Young boys like you are often given to a monastery. Even a serf can become a monk. Therefore, if you are not destined to become a craftsman or a merchant, then becoming a monk is a good option. Life within a monastery certainly is hard. However, you are assured of a place to sleep, clothing, food, medical care, and an education. Your training will take many years. When you start your training, you are called a novice, another word for beginner. You begin by learning to read and write. You study texts from the Bible, pray, and learn to farm or to acquire a certain skill. If at the end of your training you are certain you want to join the church, you take a part in a special ceremony. In this ceremony, you vow or promise to dedicate your life to God. You also vow not to marry and to live a humble and obedient life. Then the top of your head is shaved, identifying you as a monk. As a monk, you spend a large part of your day in worship and prayer. However, you also spend time working on the land or in the monastery itself. You might wash clothes, cook, or tend to the vegetable garden. You might learn to make honey, wine, or beer. Or you might learn how to make shoes or furniture. If you have a beautiful singing voice, you might participate in the performance of Gregorian chants. Gregorian chants are a form of sacred vocal music or musical speech based on hymns or passages from the Bible. Monks perform these chants on certain holy days. As a gifted artist, you might work in the scriptorium copying the work of classical writers or producing new books. For many like you, the life of monk provides a degree of security and protection from some of the challenges of medieval life. Monks chanting hymns, monk working in the scriptorium, a monk's daily prayer schedule. Medieval musings. 1. What did monks and nuns write with? Clue. This writing tool was once attached to a creature that can fly. 2. Certain religious people provide serfs with medical care. Who do you think those people were? John Duns Scotus, a member of the church.